Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with
Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are here to help you learn to pause and be present, awaken your breath, and harness the ripple effects of mindfulness for radiant health.
We get you. We know you. We are you.
We have both been successful on the surface, yet struggling underneath. We have both had cluttered brains, been overwhelmed, and exhausted.
We're healers who have found solutions and want to share them with you.
Join us here to discover a better way.
Welcome to today's podcast episode on what is needed for optimal recovery and healing. A reminder that our podcast is not medical advice.
The intention of this podcast is to share that optimal healing and recovery require mindfulness, patience, self-compassion, and ultimately retraining your brain. We hope you will discover that habitual thought patterns play a big role in healing and recovery.
Takeaways include that your body is wise and will let you know what it needs. So please listen to it. More often than not, we need to slow down and allow the healing process to progress at its own speed. So, Jessie, will you please tell our listeners about the inspiration for this episode?
Sure. So the inspiration from this episode is it's a follow-up of the episode a month or so ago about managing health issues with grace. And I had my surgery 3.5 weeks ago and have been moving through this process of healing and recovery, which I think for many people is challenging, and especially for physicians. And so what I thought would be really helpful to share is that despite all the mindfulness and coaching I have done, I noticed along the way that a lot of these same thought patterns come up. And I think they come up a lot also when perhaps you're not at your best. And so when you don't have the energy to manage your mind, or when you're feeling vulnerable or in pain or just not yourself. And so I, in my day, have actually had quite a few surgeries, and I want to talk a little bit about that because it played into my mind conversations about myself and how I should be healing and how I should be handling it. And I really will say that this time I did much better. Not that there's a better, but I think I was much more aware of my thought patterns, and I took much better care of myself, and I was much more mindful. And yet what I still noticed is that I fell into a lot of these same old habits. And what I wanted to share with others is that I expect that many other people fall into them too. And I think oftentimes we don't bring them to recovery and healing. And as many of our listeners are also in healthcare, I think it's really helpful to remind yourself what other people may or may not be thinking. And I will actually add, which is new since we talked about this episode, is I went in for my post-op follow-up yesterday, and in the conversation, she asked if I had any questions, and I realized, and you will understand why this is funny by the end of this episode, I said, I need you to tell me what to expect, because otherwise I will judge that I'm not meeting the milestones properly. And I was like, so, when am I actually supposed to feel better? When, and I was like, and you should give me the range, right? And so she was kind of amused. And I said, it's not because I want to get back to anything, but I've noticed through this whole recovery that I'm in a hurry and I'm judging myself. And I think there's a right way to do it. And so I found it very helpful so far. And now I know what to expect ahead, like when I should be feeling better and what the range is. And I always think, and we'll talk about this, think I should do it faster and better than that range. And so it was really important for me to share that with her. And she was like, oh, okay. And that piece was just so she could be very straight about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I just wanted to also call out and point out that, like many of our episodes, we do share from our direct experience, inclusive of what you're sharing now, the challenges and struggles that we faced along the way, oftentimes in real time. And really, we do this because we hope that our sharing may help you or help those that you care for in some way. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to you, Jessie, for being vulnerable and in sharing so openly about your journey thus far.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I also will say that I share it from the standpoint, I often suggest that people I coach with approach their own experiences with loving amusement. And I think that that's the approach that I have tried to take when I notice some of these old patterns popping up. So, and I think you have rightfully brought up multiple times about my hurry to be better. And it's interesting because there's a little bit of conflict. I just want to be really honest about this, that part of it is my thought patterns, but part of it is that it's human to want to feel better faster. And it's human to want to get back to who you were and to feel like you can walk around and go out to lunch and do, you know, pick up your grandchild. It's very human to want to be better. So part of it is this thought process of like getting better faster is better. And part of it is that we all want to feel good and healthy and well. And I think that's often something that pops up, like we have this judgment of ourselves. Oh, I shouldn't be thinking that. And yet I also know deep down that of course I want to feel better faster. And it isn't always a negative thing. And in fact, I'll bring up this concept. As you know, I'm going to teach yoga tomorrow. And multiple people have emailed me and said, are you sure? Is that okay? And what I tell people often is that I'm doing it for me because it's allowed me to try different poses and things that make me feel better. And so by having to share it with other people or wanting to share it with other people, I'm actually going to feel better. So I've noticed that about a month into this sort of not being as active and not doing yoga and not doing Pilates, which is something I do, my back hurts now, which has nothing to do with my surgery. It has to do with, I have an old back injury from a car accident. And if I do all that, my back never hurts. But I'm like, oh, here it comes again. It took a month, but here it is. And so for me, a lot of it is trying to figure out how you can take the best care of yourself. And it isn't always a rush. For me, yoga is actually kind of a gift to myself if I can be creative and redesign it in a way that actually feels good and only do those things. And just because the intention of this podcast is also to share some of those ideas, I'm actually really excited about the fact most people don't understand that you can use yoga as a way to heal and as a way to be kind to yourself. And like, so slow yoga and not flowing from pose to pose and not exercising, but taking care of certain parts of your body that need some attention and being kind to those that don't want any attention is actually a really cool thing that I think in our world we don't know that much about. So a lot of people call it yoga therapy. I'm not a yoga therapist, but I think being someone who understands the physical body as a physician and also as a yoga teacher, I think there's so many ways to use it to help you when you have an injury or when you're recovering that most people don't know about. So I'm hoping also that sharing a little bit of this process, and it will probably be messy, will be really helpful for other people to learn about that.
So you bring up an important point about setting up the circumstances for ourselves, mind, body, and spirit to enable healing. And yet, at the same time, we're not able to control the speed in which that recovery occurs. So thank you for pointing that out.
I think that's true. And I actually, you brought up something there that it just popped into my head is also controlling your environment in which you recover and making that as optimal as you can. I think that medical culture often is like, well, if you're sick, you're supposed to be home suffering. And then when you're not suffering, you're supposed to be back at work. But I actually this time really tried to make the environment in which I recovered very pleasant, with lots of flowers and lots of light. And as you know, I went to San Diego, and the getting there and getting home was hard, although I tried to minimize the hard part of that. But being there in the sunshine with a baby to look at and appreciate, even if I couldn't hold him at the beginning, was so healing. And so I think sometimes we don't get creative with our healing and our environment, and to say like, this would actually be really helpful for me, or what room do you want to hang out in, or what things make you happy and feel good. And to me, that's a key part of healing that we often forget about.
yeah, it was really nice to share that meal with you while you were here in San Diego. Hopefully that was also healing. I know it was healing for me.
It's lovely. Short, but lovely and early. Someone was laughing at me because I said that like all of my meals, they're now like at 5 o'clock because I go to bed really early because I'm still recovering. And one of the things post-op from this surgery is you're exhausted. And they say you're exhausted for 2 months. And so I just go to bed early now. But when we first arrived in San Diego, my son was like, oh, we're going to be an hour late for dinner, which was already past, was like at 6. And I was like, that's not going to work because I'm going to be in bed. And so I think just honoring and realizing what you can do and what you can't, and making sure you tell other people that.
Oh, just allowing the space to heal. And sometimes that space involves shifting your usual routine, as you have done.
Absolutely. And I think allowing that and being flexible so that what you usually do might not work. And the other thing is it takes a lot of trial and error. And one of the things I really had to work through was the trial. If I messed it up, I was, instead of being mad at myself, I'm like, oh, I guess I need more rest, or I guess, oh, that's too much, so I will not do that tomorrow. Or, you know, I really wish I had gotten some fresh air today when I wouldn't do it. And so again, just allowing yourself to be flexible along the way. One of the thought errors that came up for me quite a bit is that there's a right way to heal. I will also say it comes up because, and this came up in our last podcast on this topic, that other people also think there's a right way to heal. So everyone's telling you how to do it. And to really trust that you know how to heal and that you might not get it perfect the first time, but you can keep adapting.
So, Jessie, will you share with us about the thoughts that you had and maybe some false beliefs that you had throughout this journey?
Yeah, one of the ones that I really wasn't expecting, the hurry and being in a rush to heal was an old pattern for me. And so we'll talk a lot about managing that. But one of the things popped up actually in the pre-op area, which was so interesting because I thought that they started asking me questions about my history. And I had all these judgments about having had too many surgeries and too many, like that they shouldn't, like when they started asking about old issues, I was like, wow, that's like, I had an idea of what was okay and what wasn't okay and how many was too many, which they were not judging at all. It was just fascinating to me that even right before you're going into surgery, your brain will start judging things. And I think as physicians, we do judge ourselves, and it shouldn't be that there's not too many or too few. And it doesn't mean that I'm not a healthy person, which is actually what my brain started to think, like, oh, what's wrong with me? And as many of you listened to last week's episode, one of them was a knee surgery for a tennis injury. Like, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you, but I made it mean that instantly. And I was like, oh, look at me, here I go. So I think when you feel vulnerable, also your brain flips into your old patterns much more readily. The other thing that came up prior to surgery was it was good and bad. On several of the Facebook groups that I'm in with physicians, several people were asking about the surgery that I was having and how long the recovery was or should be. And there were tons of answers of women physicians who were in a hurry to get back to work. And I was able to go back after 7 days, and I did this and I did that. And then the OBs GYNs were popping in and saying, like, you really shouldn't do that because there's a risk of this or a risk of that. But that message that sooner was better. And there was a little bit of that, like, cowboy mentality that I need to be there and my patients can't be okay without me for 9 days. And I immediately noticed that tension of like, oh, faster. We do think faster is better. And what will other people think? And so it set me up to be prepared for some of these thought patterns as I started to get better. But it was also really helpful to have the information from multiple people saying, no, you have to rest for this long. You should do this. So I think there's a risk benefit in, as long as you are noticing and aware and bringing mindfulness to it, that hearing like 15, 20 OBs all recommend longer resting, I was like, okay, now I can do it. Funny that I needed their permission, even though I'd already been told that by my own surgeon. But very interesting to see. That's the culture of it. And it made me wonder a little bit about why that's our culture, and why do so many of us in our society think faster is better, and getting back to work is better. And you had mentioned to me somewhere along the line that slower healing is complete healing. And I kind of thought about that as I was thinking about what people are writing, like they're healing incompletely. Maybe they will be in pain for 12 weeks or 24 weeks because they're not allowing themselves to heal. And why don't we gift ourselves that as human beings? And why do we expect that of other people and really glorify it? So that came up beforehand. So then afterwards, what I realized, and I think it's really helpful to sort of talk about this, I realized that I had a belief that less pain medicine was better. That meant you were healing faster and you were doing better. And you as a pulmonologist righted me on that, because of course, if you have more pain, there's other issues. My husband also tried to write me on that. But what I realized is that is a very deep belief that I held for, I think I learned it in surgery, on my surgery rotation. We used to talk about how much pain medicine people took, and it was better if they took less. It was better if they were up walking sooner. It was better if they were healing faster. And particularly because this was a surgery, like, it still comes up now. I'm 3.5 weeks and I'm like, I had to take pain medicine today. It's not a good day. It's like, that's not true at all. It's like, maybe it's because I'm trying to do more, or maybe it's because I learned this yesterday, certain parts post-op heal at different times. And so when things are actually healing and when sutures are doing things, you have pain, and that's, you're supposed to. But before I had this conversation, and I was really happy to have all these thoughts, because I actually brought them up with my doctor yesterday and was asking her, like, well, I think it's this. And she's like, nope, that's not it. It's because this is what's happening at this point in your healing. And that made it so much clearer for me. So I think for people who are physicians, this is really helpful. I also really believed that, like, being able to do more sooner is better, and getting off pain medicine completely is better. Rest is not productive. It was okay to need help, apparently, in my mind, for 2 to 3 weeks, but after that, I should really be able to do it myself, which is not true. And the other thing I noticed is that we really want to be seen as a good patient by, like, your doctors or your surgeons, or like, you want to be seen as the one who's not problematic and easygoing and recovering smoothly, which is completely out of your control, honestly. But somehow there is a better patient. And I do think that that came really from being in medicine. And I hope that it's different in training today. But we had strong judgmental opinions about how people approach their recovery and their healing and medicines and such. Do you have thoughts about that?
So all of that deeply resonated, and taken metaphorically, all of this kind of applies in different ways besides just recovery from surgery. A lot of these things can also apply to, like, emotional pain and grief, for instance. So I just wanted to say that while we're honing in on recovery from surgery, this is really some gold nuggets of wisdom for life.
And I think chronic illness and aches and pains and working through something, like, we always think faster is better. We've talked about the urgency bias, but and needing help is, somehow not as strong or brave. And I would actually say that when I allowed people to help, it was a gift for them and a gift for me. But I had to consciously, like, let go and say, okay, I'm willing to be helped and served. And when I really made that conscious decision and knew that I didn't have to judge myself, it was much easier. But I think for those of us who are the doers and the fixers and the managers and the controllers, it's really hard to surrender to that. So I thought I would just share tips in more of a list type format. We'll talk a little bit about them, but I think that's probably the easiest way for some of you to sort of notice the one that is the one that you need to work on, or the one that you need to bring in. And I also want to point out that I didn't learn these in a day, right? These have been things I've been working on for quite a while. And what I noticed at this point in the process is these are the things that I'm using with some regularity that have been super helpful. And so I'm hoping that they're helpful for any of you who are going through something. So the first one was mindfulness. And I don't think I've ever spoken to patients about how mindfulness is helpful for healing. And so I want to encourage people, those of you who practice in healthcare, I think it's incredibly helpful. When you notice the discomfort, you notice how you're feeling, and you notice the thought patterns that you have that are not working well for you as a patient or someone who is working through something. And then loving amusement for me has been super helpful. Loving amusement about those patterns, that I still have them, and kind of loving amusement about the whole recovery process, because I think there's always funny things that you need help with that you just kind of have to laugh about, and things that happen that's better to just be amused than be stressed. And I think self-compassion as well for however you handle it, or how whatever happens, or whatever your medical history is, like non-judgment and adding in self-compassion, or at least not being mean to yourself about how you've handled it, is really helpful. And then it's this surrender, like it is what it is. For so many of us, it's really hard to surrender to whatever it is. It's going to take however long your body takes, and there's really not much you can do about it. I mean, I think I always thought, I have finally realized this time that there really isn't anything you can do about it. It's going to heal. Those sutures are going to heal whenever they heal, and it's out of my control. I can eat healthy, I can, rest, but beyond that, like whether it takes 3 weeks or 5 weeks, not up to me. I also loved this concept of showing up with wonder, because I think when we're healing, we show up with frustration and irritation and annoyance, and why isn't this going well? But if you actually think about the fact about how the human body heals, it's pretty magical. And we know that awe and wonder are really helpful emotions. And so this idea of, I also showed up with wonder for like the whole process of surgery. If you think about it, it's kind of crazy. And so wonder that they can do that, and they can do it so well, and wonder that you can, your body can heal in that way. And it is a pretty nifty thing. So I love this idea of wonder. And I mentioned earlier, trusting yourself. Oh yeah. What do you want to share?
Oh, just to reflect back also that right before this podcast, you were just telling me about the wonder of seeing the insides of your body.
Oh my
So
gosh, that's
just
so
wanted you to
cool. So cool.
reflect about that. Yeah. So there even was some awe
Yeah.
as part of this too.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was there to look at a specific thing, because this is actually a really interesting thought pattern. I wanted to see what the problem was, so that I knew that I had to do this surgery, and that was my only choice. That was what my brain wanted to know. And so when I went in for my post-op, they have all those photos. But what I came away from, I was very unimpressed with what the problem was, because I had already seen the path report, and I was like, clearly, but I thought that I wanted to see it. But what I was impressed with was the awe and wonder of what the human body, like I'm not a surgeon, so what it looks like through a laparoscopic camera, that was pretty cool. And like to see what they can do, and like, I don't know what the tools are called, but what they can scoop, like it was really, it inspired me about medicine again, reminded me of just that fun of learning and the really amazing things that our body can do. And I think we focus so much on what's broken and why it's not working well. And so I think, especially for having gone through all of this stuff over the last, like since January, it was so nice. I was like, wow, that looks pretty amazing in there. So I really enjoyed that. You're right. I forgot about that. Trusting yourself was one I brought up, and trusting that your body knows. You mentioned the wisdom, and that you are wise. I think we want someone else to tell us how to do it and what's right. And so trusting, if your body is telling you you're in pain, you need to rest, you do. Trusting if your body wants to, do some yoga or stretch your hips, which aren't impacted by the surgery, that could be good for you. Or trusting that you need sunshine to heal, or whatever it is. But the corollary to that is pausing to listen to others and be curious, because a few of people, you and my husband in particular, have insight into my patterns. And so I think when people come at it from a loving space, like sometimes you do want to pause and listen while trusting yourself, but it's like, maybe they have a point. I was talking to someone about this in coaching this week, actually, that people often say stuff to us and we get upset, but there's always a kernel of truth in it. And that's actually something we learned in coach training. And like, you both brought my patterns up in a loving way, but there was always a kernel of truth in it. And so it's like, well, if that's true to a little bit, how do I want to show up? And that can kind of get you to that happy medium. I think asking for help is key and a gift for you and a gift for others. One of the other concepts is that pain is a message, not a problem. And I've talked about this in there's a yoga class that I taught about aches and pains. And I like to think about pain as a message, because I think we think about it as a problem, something's broken. But when you're healing, pain is a message, like, oh, that needs tender care, or, oh, you need to rest, whatever it might be. Or maybe there's something going wrong and it's a message. But I think it's really a beautiful way to shift your judgment of pain. I think so many of us think pain is a problem. It is a problem because it doesn't feel good. But if it's a message, then it's like, well, what do I need to do to address that? And then the slow healing is complete healing. So there's no rush, no urgency. Most of it is out of your control. You can actually make it worse, but most of it is out of your control. And then I think if you are someone who is busy and always doing things, healing is uncomfortable. Like slowing down and resting, you have to expect it to be uncomfortable. And I think that was actually one of the things that was brought up in this conversation, was that it was so uncomfortable to sit. People wanted to get back to work sooner because that was comfortable. But I think one of our biggest jobs in life is to learn how to get comfortable with discomfort, because sometimes the better outcome and what your body needs and what you need for your life is on the other side of that discomfort. We often talk about that. So if you're frustrated or uncomfortable or just not liking resting, I would say, of course you don't, if you're not someone who does that on a usual basis. But could you change your story about it? Could it be lovely to hang out in bed? Could it be lovely to have someone bring you something, bring you a cup of tea? And then I think setting an intention around your recovery, which is interesting because I didn't do that at the beginning. It's something I brought in about 2 to 3 weeks in, that I actually want to have an intention. And I would have done better. I realize I'm judging, but it would have helped me to have a intention. Probably the one I think I would pick if I'm reflecting now would be kindness, or patience, or another one that comes to mind is connection. Because I slowed down so much, I actually had tons of time to connect with my loved ones. People connect with you because they're checking in on you. And so if that were your intention, it'd be such a much more peaceful and pleasant and enjoyable experience. And so the power of doing that is when you don't have an intention, you're just reacting and you're going back to all your old thoughts. And so it's something now I have adopted going forward, but I wish that I had thought of that at the beginning. So I think that can be really helpful. And then one other thing I try, which is very common in coaching, is asking my future self what I wish I had done. So would I wish that I had sat in bed and be frustrated that I was having a day that I had to rest more? Absolutely not, right? Would I wish that I had gone for a walk? Probably, but maybe a short one, or whatever it is. I think your future self can be really helpful in guiding you, especially if you're feeling a little off kilter and not sure whether you can trust yourself or trust your body. Like, well, what I will wish I had tried, or I will wish I had just stayed here and relaxed and let it go. I think can be a lot of learning, and many of us don't trust ourselves. So even asking that question is a great practice.
You're reminding me that this time that's needed for recovery and healing can also be a time where space can be allotted to prioritize really the pillars of health, because to some extent you have some control over your pillars of health. Reminding everyone, good nutrition, sleep, exercise, social connection, and stress reduction. So for some of you who are doers and where sitting around, quote unquote, healing and recovering, seemingly doing nothing might be too uncomfortable, you can actually redirect your focus into providing some space and energy towards optimizing those pillars of health. That would be very active and very healing and helpful.
I love that, because you actually have time to decide how you want to approach it. It's beautiful.
Exactly.
And then I think asking good questions, you just bring up one, which is like, what do I want to do with this time? How do I want to approach it? How do I want to feel? And choosing where to focus your attention. So do you want to focus it on what's not working and what you still can't do? Or what's lovely about my 17-year-old has spent a lot more time chatting with me, coming, checking in, checking out when he's going in and out. And that's been lovely. And so can I focus my attention on that? He makes great tea, it turns out, which he never made me tea before this. So, and now I know he can do it. So I think like, where do you want to focus your attention is really helpful. And then I think also, and I brought this up a few times, even in that process, we often think, how could I have done it better? We're always sort of trying to improve on it. Or where did I fall short? And I might just flip it and say, like, what did I do really well? How was I kind to myself? Because we often don't notice that. What did I do really well this time? And gifting yourself the learning that you have and the new ways of approaching things, and where you brought mindfulness in, and where you rested more than usual, and where you noticed habits that weren't helpful and changed them. Because I think we're always so busy saying, oh, I'm going to perfect this next time. And instead appreciating yourself for what you did well, I think is really powerful. Shall we end with some reflection questions?
Yeah. So, dear listener, what messages are your body sending to you? And are you listening? If not, can you honor your body by protecting some time and space to listen?
So we hope this conversation has been helpful for you or a loved one, or gives you some insight into perhaps what your patients are thinking and doing, and different things you might want to share with them. And we know that all of us at some point in life have to heal and recover from something. And so it's not something any of us don't need to know about, or nobody gets to avoid it in life. And so our wish for all of you is that you treat yourself with kindness, compassion, and are mindful of your thought patterns as you heal and recover, whenever that may be. So thank you all so much for listening. If you want help with any of these concepts, reach out for coaching and or mindfulness training. You can also join us for Connect in Nature next year, where we practice a lot of these concepts and bring a lot of new tools for practicing mindfulness in different situations to those who join us. And if you enjoyed the podcast, we would also love it if you left us reviews. They help other people find it and help us spread the ripple effects of mindfulness. Stay on after the sound of the singing bowl for our mindful moment, and we will see you next time.
As always, if you want to declutter your mind, be more present, and start truly living your one wild and precious life, come find us at the mindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Work with one of us.
Work with both of us.
Start or uplevel your mindfulness practice.
Discover how mindful coaching can change your life.
Or even better, do both as part of our Mindful Healers programs and retreats. You can find links to find out more about our programs and join our communities at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Reach out and get started on your journey to a life better lived today.
The content of this podcast is not meant to be medical or life advice. If you choose to participate in our mindful moments, please do so safely. Welcome to this mindful moment offering, inviting you, if it's safe for you to do so, to close your eyes or lower your gaze a few inches in front of you. And inviting you to be open to the experience of this practice. As this practice, while it's meant for someone who has just recovered or is going through the process of recovery from surgery or some other painful experience, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a surgical wound that's causing the pain, there is some risk for intensifying the discomfort and also triggering. So please be self compassionate. And should any of my cueing for this practice intensify pain or discomfort to a level where you become overwhelmed, please come back to a zone of safety where you can ground yourself by noticing the sensations of your feet or coming back to noticing your breath. And so, having said that, inviting you to settle in to this practice, setting this intention of being open to this experience. First, noticing the points of contact between you and the environment. And then, as you're ready, bringing the awareness to the general area of discomfort. It might be a surgical site or an area where you've had some chronic pain or chronic discomfort, or even emotional tension that you carry in a certain body part. Paying attention to that. Giving it some space to simply be there because it's already there. Are you able to simply experience that area just as it is without trying to resist or push it away, but in fact, allowing it to exist in this space and time concurrently with you, knowing that it doesn't define you, that it is not your complete identity, but it is perhaps in this moment just a small part of you and a small part of your human experience, or perhaps even a larger part of your human experience, whatever is closer for you to the truth. So, giving this area of discomfort some space to explore, bringing in a beginner's mind, a playful, loving, amusing curiosity to it. Can you notice the edges of where the areas of discomfort end and begin? Perhaps in your mind's eye, tracing that area. Is there a color that comes up? That is associated with that area of discomfort? Is there a temperature associated with it? Especially now, as I'm asking you to turn your gaze of attention towards that area of discomfort. And then taking the next few moments to simply just explore. Exploring that area with some words, some labels of what the experience of that discomfort is like, whether it be pressure, sharpness, dullness, achiness, tightness. Sitting with it just for a few moments longer. And then inviting you to send that area some loving kindness, some compassion. The acknowledgement of its existence and the discomfort is very important information. It's an important message that our body is telling us. And perhaps inviting you to send the breath to the area. Perhaps slowing down your inhales and exhales. To figuratively, but also literally, bring in more oxygen, more healing nutrients, more healing intentions to that area of discomfort. And with your exhale, perhaps giving yourself permission to release whatever it is that you need to release. Breathing in nourishment and healing intentions, and exhaling out whatever is not serving. And allowing you to do that for 2 or 3 more breath cycles at your own pace. And inviting you now to come back to simply noticing that area of discomfort once again, just as it is. Noticing what's here for you now, if there have been any shifts, changes in intensity or severity. And there don't have to necessarily be any changes, but just noticing if there are any. Recognizing that you can bring in the space and the time to notice the discomfort in a way that's loving and healing. And as you're ready, blinking open eyes, letting the light back in. Thanks so much for practicing with me today.